Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. All right, first thing, another reminder that it is fundraising season at antiwar.com. We have matching funds right now, so every dollar that you give will be doubled. And today we actually have a letter from Dr. Feroz Sidwa, a trauma surgeon from California who just recently worked in Gaza. He was the one that organized that letter of 99 American healthcare workers that I covered here on this show. What I think some of the most important accounts from Gaza of Americans actually going in there and coming out and describing what they see, because there's no foreign journalists have not been able to get access. And he also wrote an op-ed in the New York Times recently about similar things, again, detailing the horrors that they saw in Gaza, children being shot in the head and things like that. And he's actually been a reader of antiwar.com since 2000, which is very cool. So he wrote a letter for us telling people to help out if they can. So go check that out. We're very thankful for him to do this. He's very busy. I mean, surgeons are busy in general, but everything he's been trying to do to get more attention on the horrors that he saw in Gaza. He's been doing a lot of interviews and stuff. So again, it's cool that he started reading antiwar.com in 2000. I'll read a little of the article here. There's a picture of him performing surgery in Gaza that's a little graphic here as I scroll down that you'll see. So he says, I started reading antiwar.com in 2000. That year, the second intifada broke out. And of course, in the next year, we had 9/11. Antiwar.com helped me develop an understanding of how the world actually works, and especially what my government's role in the world has been. Without antiwar.com and other independent media organizations, people find it hard to consume mainstream media without being misled. As Noam Chomsky used to say, these organizations help people develop intellectual self-defense. Antiwar.com is a 501c3 nonprofit and has been doing this work since 1995. It is reader-supported and takes no money from any government. I hope you will support antiwar.com's work in any way you can. So again, really appreciative of someone who's been as busy as he is, doing such important work as he has to write this for us. So listen to the good doctor and go to antiwar.com/donate. This is how we're able to provide you everything, all the coverage that we provide, and it's a very efficient donation. It goes directly to running the website. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israeli ministers attend a Resettle Gaza conference. So on Monday, Israeli Knesset members and senior government ministers attended a conference on reestablishing Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip that was held in southern Israel near the Gaza border. The conference, titled Preparing to Resettle Gaza, was organized by the Israeli settler organization Nashallah and members of Netanyahu's Likud party. So at least 10 out of 32 Likud party members in the Israeli Knesset were set to attend this conference, including May Golan, who is in Netanyahu's government. She's the Minister for Social Equality and the Advancement of the Status of Women. You see this a lot, these ministers with these titles, like the Social Equality Minister. Listen to what the Social Equality Minister has to say. In a speech at this rally, which drew hundreds of attendees, Golan vowed that Palestinians in Gaza would face another Nakba. That's the word that she used, according to Haaretz. Haaretz is reporting on this. And the Nakba there, she's referring to the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian Arabs when the modern state of Israel was formed in 1948. Nakba means catastrophe. So she said, quote, "We will hit them where it hurts, their land. Anyone who uses their plot of land to plan another Holocaust will receive from us, with God's help, another Nakba that they will tell their children and their grandchildren about for the next 50 years, end quote. So, of course, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister and the leader of the Jewish Power Party, he also made an appearance. He's a big celebrity at events like this. The attendees started chanting. When he came out, the chant was, "Look over here, it's our next prime minister." And they were also chanting, "Death penalty for terrorists." referring to Ben-Gvir's calls to execute Palestinian prisoners to make room in Israeli prisons. In his speech, Ben-Gvir said, quote, "We will encourage the voluntary transfer of all Gazan citizens. We will offer them the opportunity to move to other countries because that land belongs to us," end quote. And, he's calling it voluntary, the voluntary transfer of Gaza citizens, but there's nothing voluntary about it. They're making Gaza completely uninhabitable. And what they're doing right now in northern Gaza, this general's plan, they're essentially gave an order to evacuate, and if people don't leave, the threat is essentially that they're going to kill them or starve them to death. Other Israeli ministers who attended the conference include Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Yitzhak Wasserloff, the Minister for the Development of the Negev and the Galilee. Daniela Weiss, who's a leader of the Nashallah movement that organized this, she vowed that Jewish settlements would begin popping up in Gaza within a year. She said, quote, "In less than a year, each one of you can call me and ask me if I succeeded in fulfilling my dream. Actually, you don't even have to call me. You will witness how Jews go to Gaza and Arabs disappear from Gaza," end quote. Weiss also made it clear that her ambitions for Israeli expansion did not stop in Gaza or the West Bank. She said, quote, "The real borders of Greater Israel are between the Euphrates River and the Nile," end quote. So Haaretz recently reported that the Israeli government is not seeking to revive ceasefire talks with Hamas and is now pushing for the gradual annexation of large portions of the Gaza Strip. So you see Netanyahu, I haven't seen him say this in a while, but over the past year, we've seen him say, deny that establishing settlements is the goal here. But again, over the past year, we've seen members of the Israeli government, a lot of members of the Israeli Knesset, openly support the idea of settlements in Gaza. So this is where things are leading if Israel is able to successfully carry out this ethnic cleansing plan in northern Gaza and then continue it throughout the south. This is what is going to end up happening. This is what the U.S. is supporting. The U.S. claims it doesn't support any policies that shrink the territory of Gaza, but Israel has already taken over territory of Gaza in the buffer zone and the Netzarim corridor, the Philadelphia corridor, and they don't intend to give this territory back. All right, so the next one here, Harris campaign says that she denies Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential campaign has clarified that she does not believe Israel is committing genocide in Gaza after an incident at a rally suggested that she did. At a campaign event at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, a protester interrupted Harris and said that she invested billions of dollars in genocide and pressed her about the massive child casualties in Gaza, repeatedly describing the Israeli onslaught as a genocide. Addressing the students, Harris said, quote, "What he's talking about, it's real. That's not the subject that I came to discuss today, but it's real and I respect his voice," end quote. A spokesperson for Harris's campaign said Sunday that the comments made by the protester, quote, "don't reflect the position of the Biden-Harris administration or the vice president's stance," end quote. The spokesperson added that Harris, quote, "did not agree with defining the war as a genocide, and she has not expressed such a stance in the past, as this is not her position," end quote. So obviously, if Harris acknowledged that the war in Gaza was a genocide, that would mean she's been supporting a genocide for the past year, which I believe she has been, and so does this protester, and so do many more people, obviously. But the Biden administration's position is that it's not a genocide. They've rejected the ruling from the ICJ that it's plausible Israel is committing genocide. I just mentioned some of the evidence. You look at the child casualties. That is, to me, the biggest piece of evidence for genocide. It's every day you look at the pictures and videos and you see dead children completely mutilated by strikes sometimes, and just such horrific things. And then again, those doctors talking about all of them, or just about all of them, saw on a regular basis children shot in the head or the chest, young children. When you talk about killing that many children, that's what else is that than genocide? And Harris also angered pro-Palestine groups over the weekend when discussing the situation in Gaza. This was when she was in Michigan. She called the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel the most tragic part of the conflict. Making sure they understood she viewed that as more tragic than, the tens of thousands of people who've been slaughtered in Gaza since then, or possibly over 100,000 people who've been slaughtered in Gaza since then. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes kill dozens in North Gaza. So dozens of Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces in northern Gaza on Monday as Israel is intensifying its attacks on the area in an effort to forcibly displace hundreds of thousands of civilians as part of an ethnic cleansing plan. Medical sources told Turkey's Anadolu agency that at least 29 Palestinians were killed in northern Gaza on Monday. Later in the day, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reported at least 44 Palestinians were killed in the north, and a total of 57 were killed across the Strip. Gaza's health ministry usually puts out a death toll update each day, but they did not put out numbers on Monday. In its update on Sunday, the ministry said that at least 43,603 Palestinians have been killed by Israel's assault on Gaza since October 7th, 2023. And that does not include the Palestinians missing and presumed dead under the rubble or indirect deaths. Man, you look at this picture, a child wounded by Israeli strikes being treated in the hospital. And this is, I look through these pictures. This is from Reuters. We have a Reuters account now, so that's why you see a lot more pictures in our stories. But, Reuters and other news agencies that they have deals with, I look through their Gaza pictures every day. And again, every day there's, they don't put the real gory stuff up on there, but sometimes you see dead children, or a lot of times you'll see the bodies wrapped in the white sheet, and you'll be able to tell that some of that, there's really tiny bodies, all different size bodies. And always, just about every day, you'll see children, wounded children being treated in the hospitals. Just really horrific scenes in these hospitals. So Israeli strikes on Monday included an attack on a school-turned-shelter in the Jabalia refugee camp. Wafa reported that the strike on the UN-run school killed at least 10 Palestinians and wounded 30 others. Paramedics told Anadolu that 6 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli strike that targeted civilians waiting to fill up water containers in Jabalia. Another strike killed 4 Palestinians near the Al-Yaman Al-Said hospital in the Jabalia camp. Middle East Eye reported that Israeli soldiers were raiding schools and forcing Palestinians out at gunpoint. According to eyewitnesses, Israeli soldiers were separating men from their families and telling women and children to flee to the south. You look at this picture from Middle East Eye here, some of these pictures I saw going around on social media, these huge crowds of Palestinians that they're essentially marching out of these areas. So, I mean, again, you talk about another Nakba. And I just mentioned, again, Israeli soldiers have acknowledged that the Israeli military is attempting to carry out this general's plan, this ethnic cleansing / extermination plan in northern Gaza. All right, so the next one here, video shows Israeli strike on a crowd trying to help a wounded boy. This is from the Washington Post. This was another thing I saw going around on social media at first, was this video. This is just absolutely horrific. This is in North Gaza. A journalist was filming outside of the window. So at first she heard an airstrike, and then she looked outside and began to film, and she saw that it was a boy. Just one boy by himself who was wounded by this airstrike, who she said looked like he was in pieces. And then as she's filming this boy, people are gathering to help him. And then another strike hits, a double tap. So they strike the boy. People gather around him to help. A decent-sized crowd comes around. And then, boom, another strike. You could kind of see it. She jumps away from the window when the next strike hits, but you can see the explosion. I mean, so there's some details in here about this. So the boy who was originally hit was only 13 years old, and he was just walking on the street, hit with the airstrike, and he died of his wounds. A 14-year-old boy whose feet were severed by the second strike was pronounced dead after being taken away by Red Crescent ambulances, and over 20 others were wounded. So a 13-year-old was the one initially killed, and then a 14-year-old was killed in the next strike, the double tap here. And And then the next one, this is a really sad story. Airdropped aid kills a 3-year-old Palestinian boy in southern Gaza. This is from CNN. So you see this boy here. He was killed by airdropped aid. And this has happened. I'm not sure exactly how many Palestinians have died from the aid, but I mean, it's just so, you just imagine being in their shoes there. You're being starved, and then the aid drops from the sky and kills your son or something. So a 3-year-old Palestinian boy was killed by airdropped aid in the southern city of Khan Yunis on Saturday, according to his relatives, as the humanitarian crisis spawned by the Israeli offensive compounds severe hunger across the Gaza Strip. The family was eating breakfast when pallets dropped from airplanes and careened towards the displaced area. Sami Ayad, the grandfather of the boy, told CNN. Several family members attempted to take cover inside their improvised tents, but the falling parcel killed Sami instantly. And his aunt and cousin were also wounded on their foot and face. So this is, they mentioned that several countries have airdropped aid into Gaza, including the U.S., the UK, Jordan, and the UAE. And I believe on this day, the UAE dropped 81 food packages into Khan Yunis. That's according to Israeli numbers. But just such a horrific story here. All right, the next one, Israeli strikes kill women and children in Lebanon. This one is from Jason Ditz. Israeli attacks continue to escalate across Lebanon, with airstrikes targeting not just military targets, but also hitting residential neighborhoods. Today, which was Monday, 2 missiles struck a house in the densely populated Al-Nabi Anam neighborhood of Baalbek, a major city in eastern Lebanon. The strike killed 6 members of the Othman family, all women and children, and wounded at least 8 other civilians. There was no indication that anything other than the civilian house was hit. There's been no comments on this strike from Israel, so there was other strikes across Lebanon on Monday as well. The next one here is actually kind of about the ceasefire situation, or lack of ceasefire situation, I should say. UN Resolution 1701, not enough to end the war on Lebanon, according to a U.S. envoy. And that U.S. envoy is Amos Hochstein. So U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein visited Beirut on October 21st for talks with Lebanese officials about an Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire, saying that an agreement based on UN Security Council Resolution 1701 is not enough. And this article, by the way, I should say, is from The Cradle. So Hochstein said after his meeting on Monday with Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, quote, "We're going to have a substantive conversation with the government of Lebanon, with the government of Israel, about how best to bring about a cessation of hostilities to end this conflict," end quote. Current negotiations between the Lebanese and Israeli governments call for a ceasefire. Sorry, I'm kind of stumbling over my words here. Let me start that sentence again. Current negotiations between the Lebanese and Israeli governments for a ceasefire have been based on UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which set the conditions for ending the July war in 2006. The resolution requires Hezbollah to disarm and that Israeli forces who have invaded Lebanese territory during the war not enter Lebanese territory without the permission of the Lebanese government. It also requires Israel not to fly in Lebanese airspace. However, Hochstein said in Beirut that even if Lebanon and Israel commit to Resolution 1701, it is not enough. He said, quote, "For the U.S. and the rest of the world that will come in to support Lebanon's economic and military efforts, we need to be assured that this won't lead to another round of conflict in a month, a year, or 2 years. This is why a mere public commitment to 1701 is not enough. We need to work on not just updating 1701, but ensuring that practical measures are put in place," end quote. So by doing so, Hochstein, who was born in Israel, he's an IDF veteran. This is who Biden sends to negotiate between Lebanon and Israel, is an Israeli-born IDF veteran. He appeared to be promoting Israel's conditions for a ceasefire. Axios reported that this is what Israel's demanding. They want their forces to be allowed to continue ground operations in Lebanon, referred to as active enforcement, to make sure Hezbollah does not rearm and rebuild its military infrastructure close to the border in exchange for agreeing to a ceasefire. So they want the freedom to be able to invade southern Lebanon whenever they want, and they also want their air force to have freedom to violate Lebanese airspace with its warplanes. So And I wouldn't be surprised if that is what Hochstein is saying to Lebanon. And, we know that the U.S. supports, has basically given full-throated support to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and the increased airstrikes. And they've said, the State Department has said they want a change in government. They want a new president. They want Hezbollah out of the parliament. So they're all in on this, and they don't want to ceasefire anytime soon unless Israel gets exactly what it wants. And there was that initial kind of claims from the U.S. back in September that they wanted a ceasefire, that they didn't want things to escalate. But then they eventually just, came out, upfront with their support for it. But there was a report from Politico that found publicly they were calling for a ceasefire, but privately, Hochstein and Brett McGurk, the top Middle East official on the National Security Council, privately they were egging Israel on, basically saying this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape the region. They're all in on this. All right, so the next one here, more about the strikes. 4 killed in an Israeli strike on a Beirut neighborhood. This article is from Reuters. A child and 3 adults were killed and 24 others were wounded on Monday in an Israeli airstrike near the Lebanese capital Beirut's main government hospital, the National Health Ministry said in a statement. And that's really all the details we have. I just kind of saw this last minute and threw it in there. Then it just mentions some of the background here. Israel's campaign in Lebanon has displaced more than 1.2 million people multiple times, according to Lebanese authorities. Israel says its aim is to drive Hezbollah from the border. There's not really much else here, but I just saw this strike near the hospital in Beirut. All right, so the next one here, Iran says that the U.S. approves Israel's plans to attack. So Iran's mission to the UN has said in a letter to the UN Security Council that President Biden has shown, quote, tacit approval and explicit support for Israel's unlawful military aggression against Iran, end quote. The Iranian mission to the UN pointed to comments Biden made in Germany on Friday when he said that he had a good understanding of Israel's plans to attack Iran and when it might occur. Iran's mission said, quote, the United States will bear full responsibility for its role in instigating, inciting, and enabling any acts of aggression by Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as for the catastrophic consequences on regional and international peace and security, end quote. So we know the U.S. has been coordinating closely with Israel on its plans to attack Iran in response to that Iranian missile barrage that came after a series of Israeli escalations. And the U.S., we don't know if they're going to provide direct support for the attack on Iran, but we do know that they are going to provide support by defending Israel from any Iranian reprisal. They deployed that THAAD missile system and about 100 troops. So you see Iran saying this, that the U.S. is going to be fully responsible. That suggests that maybe in Iran's reprisal, they might target, if they think that it's, it means full-blown war, depending on how big the attack is. If Israel hits Iran and then that's it, it's on, then Iran's next attack would probably be pretty huge, and I'm sure would also target some U.S. military assets in the region. And then I just mentioned that leak over the weekend of the U.S. Observations of Israeli preparations. All right, so the next one here, 2 civilians killed in Israeli airstrike on Syrian capital of Damascus. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So there was more Israeli airstrikes in Syria on Monday. It hit a civilian car in Damascus's Maza district, killing 2 civilians and wounding 3 others. Syrian state media, Sana'a, confirmed the incident had destroyed the car and did material damage to private property, including a nearby hotel. The strike was reportedly near the Syrian Information Ministry. There was a strike in the same neighborhood in Damascus that killed 7 civilians in an apartment building. The Israeli military claimed that they killed a Hezbollah financier in this attack, but they did not name the victim. And they claimed that the Damascus attack was part of the strikes on banks across Lebanon. But again, they didn't name who they targeted, and they didn't show any evidence for that. Israel has been attacking Syria for years, targeting sites in Damascus and elsewhere throughout the country. They've been bombing Syria with impunity for years and years, and over this past year, the strikes have really increased. All right, so the next one here, Austin in Ukraine announces $400 million in weapons. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin made an unannounced visit to Ukraine on Monday and announced a new $400 million weapons package. The Pentagon said that during the visit, Austin will, quote, meet with Ukrainian leadership and underscore the U.S. commitment to providing Ukraine with security assistance it needs to defend itself from Russian aggression on the battlefield, end quote. So Austin's visit comes as Russian forces are taking back territory in Kursk and continuing to make their gains in eastern Ukraine. In the face of these advances, Zelensky has unveiled his so-called victory plan, which is essentially a list of demands for more military aid from his Western backers. And some of the things he's asking for still, the support with the long-range strikes inside Russia, and he wants NATO countries to help shoot down Russian missiles and drones. Both of these things risk nuclear war. And they've been rejected by the U.S. and NATO so far. There's no sign, Austin went over there. There's no sign that he's was even thinking about saying yes to these requests at this point. It looks like the U.S. did back down after Putin made things clear, that this does risk nuclear war. Despite no clear path for a Ukrainian victory, the U.S. continues to fuel the proxy war with fresh weapon shipments. The $400 million arms package that Austin announced will be provided through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the U.S. to send weapons straight from U.S. military stockpiles. They've been announcing a lot of weapons packages lately for Ukraine. This one includes HIMARS ammunition, artillery ammunition, mortar systems, TOW missiles, Javelin anti-tank systems, armored personnel carriers, satellite equipment, small arms, grenades, demolitions equipment, and things like that. The Pentagon also released a fact sheet that said the U.S. has committed $59.5 billion in weapons for Ukraine since Russia invaded, including other types of aid. The proxy war has cost U.S. taxpayers at least $186 billion so far. All right. So the next one here, 51,000 Ukrainians have deserted the armed forces this year. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The Ukrainian prosecutor's office has opened 51,000 cases of desertion through the first 9 months of 2024. The number of soldiers abandoning their posts is likely to double last year's total. So 51,000 cases of desertion, that is quite a bit. The Times of London reported data from the Ukrainian government showing that, quote, 51,000 criminal cases were initiated for desertion and abandonment of a military unit between January and September of this year, end quote. El País, the Spanish outlet, previously noted that 45,000 Ukrainians were being prosecuted for desertion from the start of the year through August. So at the start of the year, Kiev was estimated to have between 500 and 800,000 active duty soldiers and an additional 300,000 reservists. The Ukrainians have also sustained casualties fighting to defend from Russian advances in Kursk. Kiev has struggled to fill its ranks with fresh soldiers, leading Ukraine to drop its conscription age from 27 to 25. And now we have American politicians pushing, drop that even lower to 18, send those young men, send those teenagers into the meat grinder, keep this thing going. We got to keep making money over here for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. So one Ukrainian who deserted told the Times that prison was a better option than the military because, quote, at least in prison, you know when you will be able to leave, end quote. And I know there's a growing calls for the soldiers who, volunteered or some were conscripted as well in the first days of the war who, 2.5 years later are still fighting and their families are, want them to come home. I know there was one soldier who kind of made a public show of desertion to just draw attention to this issue. So, things are not looking good for the Ukrainian war effort. 51,000 desertions in 1 year. To me, that sounds like a big figure. I was looking up desertion numbers in previous wars. It seems like this is, considering the how big the size of Ukraine's military, this seems to be a very high rate of desertion. All right, so the next one here, U.S. and Canadian warships transit the Taiwan Strait. Don't worry, they're still stoking tensions with China with all this other stuff going on. The U.S. and Canada each sent a warship through the Taiwan Strait on Sunday in a joint operation that came less than a week after the Chinese military conducted blockade drills around the island. The U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet said the guided missile destroyer USS Higgins and the Canadian frigate Vancouver made the transit. The U.S. framed the operation as routine, but Beijing always views U.S. military activity in this sensitive waterway as a provocation. course, they're very close to China's coast, and it's just a very sensitive area. The PLA, the Chinese military, said that the U.S. and Canadian warships disturbed the situation and undermined peace and stability. The PLA's Eastern Theater Command said that its forces monitored the ships through the transit. And the U.S. frequently sails ships through the Taiwan Strait about once every month, once every 2 months. But they've been getting their Western allies to also do it. Last month, Germany sent warships through the Taiwan Strait for the first time since 2002. China was not happy about that. Here, the U.S. is doing it with Canada, something that they've done before. I know France has done a few Taiwan Strait transits recently. So, the tensions are really rising. Again, I mentioned China did the blockade drills last week. That was in response to a speech by Lai Ching-te, the Taiwanese president. But also they said it's a warning to, external forces. And the U.S. is not listening to China's concerns and continues to increase support for Taiwan with military aid and things like that. So there's just a lot to keep an eye on this part of the world as well. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ted Snyder, Nukes or NATO, the hidden threat behind Zelensky's victory plan. One from Ron Paul, why should we fight wars for Ukraine and Israel? And I really like the first line in this piece. He says, when you take on the role of the world's policeman, don't be surprised when countries who cannot fight their own wars call 911. One from Jonathan Cook, police escalate the British state's war on independent journalism. One from Mitchell Plitnick, no, U.S. is not putting pressure on Israel to end its war. One from Trita Parsi, who leaked U.S. classified docs on potential Israeli attack plans. So please go check all of that out. Again, help us with our fundraiser, antiwar.com/donate. Other ways you can support us is just by sharing the show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff helps out. I appreciate everyone who does. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.